Upadhyay, and I have a question for you tonight. What is the one thing that all 7.9 billion people in the world are chasing? The one thing that you want in life? Happiness. We all crave it. There was a time when it was a spiritual experience. Today, happiness is an industry worth over $4.2 trillion. Everyone is selling it. Let me show you. In the last 3 years alone, 3.4 million people have enrolled themselves for a Coursera course on happiness. A course on happiness. There are 151 million Instagram posts with hashtag happiness. 1 million with hashtag happiness is a choice. Our fairy tales promise a happily ever after. There is merchandise selling happiness in big, bold letters. Notebook covers remind you to choose happiness. Honestly, who wouldn't like to? But what exactly is happiness and where do we find it? Hindu scriptures say humans can only temporarily secure happiness on earth. This is by pursuing the Purusharthas, or the 4 chief purposes of human life, which are dharma, or religious and moral duty, arth, wealth, kam, conjugal bliss, and moksha, liberation. Permanent happiness, according to Hinduism, is only in the highest heaven. And for that, we must obtain liberation. Islam says happiness is a lifelong process. It includes peace of mind, tranquility of heart, contentment in the world, and everlasting bliss hereafter. The followers of Moses deem happiness as the ultimate goal of man. They say the pursuit of happiness is a moral duty. Pursuit of happiness, by the way, is also enshrined in the US Declaration of Independence. Today, at least 200 universities, including the University of Cambridge, have research institutes dedicated to studying happiness. And yet, happiness remains one of the least understood and subjective terms. A good cup of coffee is happiness. A bout of good weather is happiness. An evening well spent is happiness. A good movie is happiness. The end of lockdown is happiness. It's actually that simple and attainable, and yet it's complicated and seemingly hard to get. So much so that we need books, videos, and podcasts to help us find happiness. Finland is the world's happiest country. People there spend more time in the nature. The Finns love swimming, reading, and eating well. One publication asked people from 17 countries what happiness is to them. A 22-year-old from Greece said happiness is finishing school, getting a stable job, and then getting to retire, be free of work, stress, and health issues. A 20-year-old from Germany said happiness is contentment. A 19-year-old from Iraq said happiness is survival. A 30-year-old from India said happiness is peace and satisfaction. A 16-year-old from the Philippines said happiness is laughter through the toughest of times. You see, happiness is subjective. So is its definition. Mandarin has at least 4 words for happy: Gao Xing, Kai Xin, Xing Fu, and Kuai Lei. In Japan, happiness is linked to the ideas of good luck and social harmony. In the United States, happiness is linked to freedom and personal achievement. But in China, there is a certain aversion to happiness too. It is believed that relentless pursuit of happiness or too much happiness can bring unhappiness. How do you tell if happiness is too much? Can we measure it? We can't. But very often, we pit our levels of happiness against others. We use comparison to measure happiness. But that's not how research works. Scientists working on happiness have developed scales to measure it. The Steen Happiness Index, for example, it includes 20 items. We are expected to read them and select the ones that describe us best. There is the Subjective Happiness Scale, the Happiness Scale by Fordyce, or what is known as the Emotion Questionnaire. And speaking of questionnaires, I have one. Who is responsible for ensuring that we are happy? Is happiness a personal choice, or do governments have a role to play in inducing it? Let's try and answer these. How do we make ourselves happy? I could list out things like hone your hobbies, spend time doing what you love, etc., but you know all of this already. So instead, I will address a myth. A lot of us think that money and travel equals to happiness. Well, we may be wrong. Science says that while we can buy happiness, that happiness is hedonic. Money becomes a big factor in long-term happiness only if you're struggling to make ends meet. And then you happen to come into money. Otherwise, money has very little to do with sustainable happiness. Costa Rica makes for a very interesting case study here. It is far from rich. In fact, if you look at the per capita wealth, Costa Rica has just 1/5 of the wealth of America. Yet it ranks above the US in the latest edition of the Global Happiness Index. It did so the year before too. Costa Rica shows us that government policy can play a big role in inducing happiness. In 1948, the then Costa Rican president, Jose Figueres Ferrer, abolished the military. That money was diverted to health and education sectors. Today, Costa Rica spends nearly 8% of its GDP on education. The country's top university is funded by the government. Costa Rica is the world's 16th happiest country. The world's happiest country, Finland, was named the world's most literate nation in 2016. Clearly, education can and does play a role in happiness, as do government policies. These are the happiest countries in the world. In many of them, you see, well-being takes a clear policy precedence.